So yeah, here we are at the start of 2025. We're going to look back at 2024 and we're going to see God's hand working in the world. And I thought to get us in the zone and to get us thinking about some of the things that happened in the world over the last 12 months, I'm going to play you a video clip that's from a news organisation, and it's their summary of what happened in the world. And the amazing thing is, it's almost like watching a prophetical Christadelphian video, because the things that they talk about, they don't mention the Bible, but they're all events that we, I think, would say, yeah, these are the type of events that we have long looked for and we're interested in.
Well, it was the year of destructive hurricanes and devastating wars, of parliamentary huckers and a global obsession with a pygmy hippo. This is what the world looked like in 2024.
If this felt like a year of disruption, it could be because it was the biggest election year in human history, with around half the world heading to the polls.
For context, that's 3.2 billion people.
There was a narrow win for India's Narendra Modi, a massive comeback for UK's Labour after 14 years in the wilderness, and the least surprising result of the year, Russia's Vladimir Putin romping in for a fifth term, just weeks after the suspicious death of one of his political rivals.
Alexei Navalny has died suddenly in prison, according to the country's prison service.
Ukraine had to postpone its elections, the war with Russia dragging into a third year. Russia saw territorial gains in Ukraine's east, while Ukraine made a surprise push into Russia's west. North Korea gifted thousands of troops to bolster Putin's forces, and the outgoing Biden administration gave the green light for Ukraine to fire US-supplied missiles into Russian territory. But it was a conflict 2,000 kilometres to the south that captured and divided the world. Israel's assault on Gaza continued, the death toll surpassing 45,000, with the UN claiming most victims are women and children. Hamas continues to hold Israeli hostages, and days after triggering deadly pager explosions across Lebanon and Syria, Israel stepped up its fight with Hezbollah, moving troops into southern Lebanon and razing buildings in Beirut. The International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu as year-round global protests demanded other governments end support for Israel. For many Americans, the supply of arms to Israel was a crucial election issue, but substantive policy debates struggled for oxygen in a campaign defined by drama, shock twists, and the McDonald's fry station.
Never touched by a human hand. Nice and clean.
Being a convicted felon didn't slow Teflon Don, and his rematch against Joe Biden led to a debate performance so disastrous...
We finally beat Medicare.
The president had to withdraw from the race.
So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation.
That torch passed to his vice president just 107 days before the election.
I accept your nomination to be president of the United States of America.
There were 2 assassination attempts, absurd sound bites.
They're eating the dogs.
Leaping billionaires.
All right!
And razor-thin poll margins that belied the decisive result.
CNN projects that Donald Trump
Amazing, really,
has
isn't
been
it, when you
elected.
see the video clip like that and the sort of things that they've highlighted. It's interesting, of course, that Joe Biden said, only the Lord Almighty will force me to quit. And within 4 weeks, he was forced to quit. I mean, actually, he was absolutely right, of course, that it is God that puts the world leaders in power. And this doesn't mean that Trump is good and Biden is bad. We know that that isn't the case. God puts leaders in power that might be terribly wicked and evil. And probably when you look at President Trump and the sort of character that he is, we are looking at the basest of men. And there he is at the very time of the end. And God wants him in power at this point. Probably, I was talking to Stuart earlier, it's about potentially huge destabilization. Look at what's on the news today with, I'm going to take over Greenland. We're going to change what the Gulf of Mexico is going to be called. I mean, who knows what this man is capable of in this coming term that's fast approaching. The whole world is on tenterhooks, aren't they, as to what possibly is Donald Trump in his final 4 years, because he can't run again. What's he going to do? But we're not going to look forward. Really, we're looking back at 2024, and we're going to see some amazing things that have happened. Back in January 2024, so about a year ago now, there was this interesting headline: "Are we witnessing the opening salvos of World War III?" By the way, as I do each year, these are the top sections of the weekly World Watch slides that I send out. It's got where the headline is from, in this case, The Independent. It's on January the 19th last year. And this section in black there is word for word what was written in The Independent on that particular day. And on the World Watch slides, I then put some stuff in blue underneath that I've chopped off on this slide with comments and then a Bible verse. That's what goes out. But to save reinventing it all, I've just cut the bit from the slide. It makes it a bit easier putting this together. So anyway, look what it said here a year ago. "It's hard to escape the impression of a theatre of military conflict that is inexorably growing to the east and the south, if not yet to the north and the west. And if you look backwards rather than forwards, the Hamas massacres of Israelis on the 7th of October and Israel's all-out military response can be seen as turning the tiny sliver of the Gaza Strip into the epicenter of a conflict that could embrace regions many hundreds of miles further afield. The Hamas attacks of October were followed by dire warnings that this could be the spark that ignited a regional conflagration, that it was only a matter of time before Iran became directly involved, probably through its proxy Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and that before long you could be standing on the threshold of the next world war." That was written in January, and actually pretty much everything that's been written there did start happening, as we're going to see. So when you look at the scriptures, right, so from a prophecy point of view, really it's all about lots of nations, isn't it? That's what God's telling us about. He's telling us about what Israel's going to do. He's telling us about what Russia's going to do. He's telling us about what Iran's going to do, what Syria's going to do, America, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Lebanon. All these are, nations, and many other nations as well. There's Europe that's talked about. Britain's talked about. And they're all scattered, aren't they? All these prophecies, they're not all put into one place. And you think, right, I just need to read that book from this chapter to that chapter, and I've worked it out. God has sort of sprinkled them all throughout the scriptures. And our job is to sort of piece these pieces together. It's like a complicated jigsaw puzzle. And all of them are interacting with different pieces. It's not as simple as this. This nation will be impacting this nation. There'll be a prophecy that links this one to this one and this one over here. But at the center of it all is this nation, Israel. And so everything we're going to look at this evening is centered all on this nation, because that's what God's prophecies. They're only interested ultimately with the impact of all of those nations on his people, on his land. So we're going to just start off and we're going to have a think about what's happened in relation to Israel and Hamas to start with in the Gaza Strip. So back in February last year, there was this headline that Netanyahu unveiled Israel's day after plan for Gaza. And it then said in the Times, Israel wants operational freedom throughout Gaza without a time limit as part of its post-war plan for the territory. And Netanyahu said Israel will maintain operational freedom of action in the entire Gaza Strip without a time limit for the purpose of preventing the renewal of terrorism and thwarting threats from Gaza. This all began, didn't it, on the 7th of October 2023. As of today, Israel has been fighting a war with somebody or other consistently every day for 458 days and counting. Brothers and sisters say to me, Andy, I think they sort of think I saw the Six-Day War, and I didn't. I was born in 1969, so I just missed it. But there's many in this room that probably did see the Six-Day War in 1967. And they say, the community was absolutely on the edge of their seat in those days. And there was a multitude of baptisms. Everybody was thinking, this is it. And not taking away the significance of the Six-Day War when they recaptured the land and Jerusalem. Clearly that was massively significant, but it was a 6-day war. 6 days. This is 458 days and counting. Israel is fighting a war on 7 fronts right now. It's fighting Hamas in the Gaza Strip. It's fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's fighting the Houthis in Yemen. It's fighting the rebels in Syria. It's fighting the Ayatollahs in Iran. And so it goes on. This is a spiraling out of control situation. But going back to Hamas, Netanyahu says, we're not just moving away from this. We cannot afford for this to ever happen again. 1,200 plus Jewish people, Israelis, killed back on October the 7th. We can't afford for this ever to happen again. Netanyahu said in May, we will fight until the end, until victory. And he said that on Israel's 76th Independence Day. And Netanyahu said, as the psalmist says, I will not die, rather I will live. Thanks to this spirit, we defeated our enemies and secured our existence, Netanyahu added, and said, today we are infinitely stronger, but the desire to destroy us has not disappeared. It is still here. And he's right when he says that. There is a desire for these surrounding peoples to destroy Israel. And he says, we're going to not let that happen. We will fight until victory. Iran's Ayatollah there and the Hamas leader met to vow to destroy Israel. This was Israel World News back in May last year. During a meeting, Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and Hamas leader declared that they would see the day when Israel will be eliminated. Iran in July vowed revenge after the Hamas leader was assassinated in Tehran. So in May, they vowed to destroy Israel. In July, Israel killed that person. They killed the Hamas leader in Iran. Have a listen to this.
More breaking news right now, and this coming from the Middle East. Tensions skyrocketing there after assassinations this week, and we are getting right now some brand new details about exactly how the assassination of the Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh went down. And these are incredible details that Jeremy Diamond is breaking. He's in Haifa, Israel, in northern Israel right now. And Jeremy, these details are pretty stunning.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Aaron. I mean, this was a quite sophisticated operation. I'm told by a source familiar with the matter that Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran early yesterday morning using a bomb that was covertly hidden in the guest house where he was staying. But this bomb, I'm told, was actually covertly planted inside that guest house about 2 months ago, and it was only remotely detonated once it was clear that Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas's political leader, was actually inside his room.
This shook the Iranian regime to its core, because there was the Hamas leader in a highly protected, highly secure area, and somehow or other Israel snuck a bomb into the room in this secure compound and blew it up on the very night that he stayed overnight in this place. The intelligence was off the scale. Nobody really knows how on earth they managed to do this. And you can imagine the Ayatollahs going to bed that night thinking, I wonder what's under my bed. You know, this is shocking. And the world was astonished at Israel's ability to be able to do this. And so the main leader of Hamas was eliminated at that point. Just about a week later, Netanyahu declared that Israel was now at war with Iran's proxies. That's talking about all of these groups that Iran sponsors, terrorist groups around Israel, with the sole aim, they only exist to destroy Israel. That's the only reason that they exist, is to destroy Israel. Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu has declared Israel is in a multi-arena war against Iran's axis of evil, targeting its affiliates, including Hamas and Hezbollah. On October the 17th, so what they did in August, they went and killed the head of Hamas that we've just looked at. But then in middle of October, they killed what they called the mastermind of the October the 7th attacks. This chap called Sinwar, or Sinwar. It's interesting, Sinwar. You think, yeah, that sort of sums it all up, really. But there he is, look, Sinwar. And they eventually found him in Gaza, and it says that they found him by chance, and using a wooden stick, they pushed back the man's upper lip to reveal an identifiable gap between his front incisors, and they knew they'd got him, and then they went in and fully identified this man. They killed him, and he was the mastermind behind it all. And you might wonder why I've got that rather strange picture at the top. We'll cover that in a minute, but there is a lady hammering a tent peg through the head, as it appears, of Sinwar, but we'll have a look at that in a minute. The intense phase of Israel's war in Gaza is over as focus shifts to Lebanon. That was in June last year. That was what Prime Minister Netanyahu said. He said that the war against Hamas is winding down as the country focuses on its border with Lebanon, where fighting with the militant group Hezbollah is escalating. He basically said the success will mean Israel will likely turn its forces towards the Iranian-backed Hezbollah group. And of course that did start happening. So have a look at this, because this again shocked the world, and I'm sure we all saw what's coming up now and thought this is quite incredible what Israel's doing here.
The unprecedented attack in the Middle East. Thousands of pagers belonging to members of Hezbollah exploded across the country, injuring thousands of people.
New York Times is reporting Israel hid explosives in those pagers and then triggered the explosion simultaneously. This morning, schools across Lebanon are closed after an unprecedented attack involving thousands of pagers held by Hezbollah militants that exploded simultaneously.
These were not lithium-ion batteries cooking off. These were explosives.
Thousands of devices detonated in Lebanon after receiving a message yesterday, killing at least 9 people and injuring almost 3,000. Hezbollah saying as many as 11 of its members were killed. Devices blew up in hands, pockets, and here in a shopping bag.
You know, the incredible thing is, they've now found that the company that supplied the pages to Hezbollah was a Jewish Israeli company that had set itself up in the middle of Europe somewhere, I forget which nation it was. So they actually bought the very kit from Israel that was going to blow them up. It's mind-blowing. You know, if somebody had written this in a book, you'd say, well, that's never going to happen. And it did. And they designed it to maim as many people as they could. They were all terrorists, all carrying these pages. And as they answered it, they put it to their ear because it said, you need to listen to a message. So the message comes through, you've got to listen to this. So they put it there and then they detonated it. And you can imagine the damage I mean, it's horrible. But, you know, these are people that are out to destroy Israel. And Israel had got all of this in place. An unleashed Israel is humiliating its enemies, was in the Telegraph on September the 18th. The audacious attack, talking about this pager attack, on the Iran-backed terror group Hezbollah is likely to have effectively halted their operations, at least temporarily, and crippled their command and control networks. So then, this is again incredible, that Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, was then killed inside Lebanon itself. Hezbollah's veteran leader, Nasrallah, who led the group for more than 3 decades, has been killed by Israel. If you go and look this up, it's just mind-blowing. Do you know how many bombs they dropped on the place where they were meeting? Because he's in an underground bunker in Lebanon. And Israel dropped exactly 80 bombs, that's 80 bombs, on this place. A huge number of bunker-busting bombs and other types of bombs, because this was it. They were going to finish this guy off, and that is what they did. They dropped a total of 80, all on the same place, because he was buried deep underground in these underground rooms, and it needed that amount. And it caused the whole area to shake, so great were the explosions. And they removed this terrorist leader in this incredible attack. Hezbollah battered and broken by heavy Israeli attacks. That was October the 8th. Israeli Defense Minister said Hezbollah has been left battered and broken after a bombing campaign that killed most of the group's military leadership, including Hassan Nasrallah, its chief, since 1992. So let's have a look at this, this next video that talks about where we got to recently with Hezbollah.
Hezbollah's decision to give up its fight as part of the so-called Axis of Resistance was a massive defeat for the Lebanese terror group. While still firing from a distance, they've effectively withdrawn from the border and given up their pledge to stand with Hamas in Gaza. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz explains.
Hezbollah effectively surrendered on its pledge to stand with Hamas after more than 13 months of cross-border exchanges, beginning just after the October 7, 2023 Hamas massacre of Israelis. The war with Israel took an immense toll on the terror group's leadership, officers, fighters, and infrastructure. While still able to fire heavy rocket barrages toward Israel up until the ceasefire, the group lost its leader Hassan Nasrallah, his potential successor, as well as its chief of staff and a range of top operational officers. The pager attack left many hundreds of its members dead or wounded. Much of the Hezbollah center in the Dakhia neighborhood of Beirut lies in ruins. Other Hezbollah targets in central Beirut were not spared. The front lines of Hezbollah on the border were overrun by IDF troops that reached as far as the Litani. Hezbollah fighters were killed and enemy infrastructure built inside Lebanese villages destroyed. Hezbollah was not fully defeated, but was left extremely damaged and in retreat.
All this has come at great cost to Israel as well, really, hasn't it? Because what it's done, as it says on the screen there, Israel's decapitation strategy is working, but it comes at a heavy cost. And that is because people around the world have risen up, haven't they? Governments have gone hard into Israel to say, you know, you're not doing the right thing here, you're not doing this right. There's people on the streets, there's protests. We've seen them in London, we've seen them in many capitals of the world. A lot of anti-Israel sentiment because they don't like seeing all the collateral damage. They don't like seeing people being killed. Nobody does. But Israel is fighting for its survival, and we see that. But the world is turning against Israel. And I think we can expect that to happen, can't we, with Bible in hand, that the world doesn't see Israel fighting terrorists. They sort of see Israel fighting freedom fighters, because Israel's an occupying state, and really they've no right to be there almost, when you look at all the propaganda that comes out against Israel. So those are some of the things that have been going on in Israel itself. There's a lot more we'll look at in a minute, but I just thought we'd stop for a second and look at a couple of verses. So in Joel chapter 3, and I've done a whole talk on Joel on YouTube if you wanted to have a look at that, which goes into this in a lot of detail. But in Joel chapter 3, it's a chapter about the time of the end. It's a chapter about how the nations are actually ultimately gathered to Armageddon. And in that chapter, it talks about the lead up to Armageddon. And in verse 4 of Joel chapter 3, it says, God talking, by the way, this is the Lord God himself talking. He says, yea, what have you got to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon, and all the coasts of Palestine? Will you render me a recompense? And if you recompense me, swiftly and speedily will I return your recompense on your own head. The NIV puts it like this. God says, are you repaying me for something I have done? If you're paying me back, I will swiftly and speedily return on your own heads what you have done. So God singles out here, in the lead up to Armageddon, 3 places, Tyre, Zidon, and the coast of Palestine. And he says, have you got something against me? And if you're going to try and do something against me, I am going to turn it straight back swiftly and speedily on your own head. And I believe what God is talking about ultimately are the very things that we've been seeing happening. Because what are these places? Where is Tyre and Zidon, and where are the coasts of Palestine? Who is God referring to? Well, if we go and have a look at the coasts of Palestine, or some versions say the coasts of Philistia, you're looking at this area here on the map, and it is the area pretty much of what we would now call the Gaza Strip. It's not absolutely completely identical to the square foot, but here's Gaza City. This is the Gaza Strip area. the area of Philistia, the coasts of Philistia, is the area equivalent to where Hamas is ruling. God says effectively, what have you got to do with me, Hamas? And do you know what the answer to that is? Nothing. I am going to bring it back swiftly and speedily on your own head. And if we haven't seen that happen, then I don't know what else we have seen. God then says the same applies with Tyre and Zidon. Where are Tyre and Zidon, but up here in Lebanon, happens to be the stronghold of Hezbollah. And who are the two groups that Israel's fighting right now? You know, in a major extent, it is, in fact, of course, Hamas and Hezbollah. And God says, what have you got to do with me? Nothing. I'm going to bring a recompense back on your own head. Now, it doesn't take you long with the cross-references in your Bible or some sort of concordance to leap from Joel chapter 3, verse 4 to Psalm 83, verses 4 to 7. Well, really, the whole of Psalm 83. Because look here. There is Tyre and Zidon and the coast of Palestine, and Psalm 83 has got the very same people. The Philistines and the inhabitants of Tyre. But what's Psalm 83 talking about? Psalm 83 is exactly this same event. It's just that you've got more detail. So, we go and have a look in Psalm 83, and it says, keep not thou silence, O God, hold not thy peace, be not still, O God, for lo, thine enemies make a tumult. Do we think God's enemies are making a tumult in 2024? I think so. They that hate thee have lifted up the head. Have they lifted up the head? I think so. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. And they've said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. Hamas leader goes to Iran and they talk about, and they openly talk about it, destroying Israel. This is Psalm 83. Verse 5 says that they've consulted together with one consent. So they've all got together to work this out. They are confederate against thee, the tabernacles of Edom, the Ishmaelites of Moab, the Hagarenes, Gebal, Ammon, Amalek, the Philistines that we've already talked about. That's the area of the coast of the Philistia, and the inhabitants of Tyre, and Asher also is joined with them. So then you look at this slide that we've looked at many, many times leading up to 2024, and we've been talking about this for the last decade, saying that there will be an initial inner ring war around Israel involving Israel's immediate enemies. Do you think we're seeing that? Now, when you look at this map, pretty much all of it is coming into play. But there's Philistia, that's Hamas. There's Tyre and Gebal. That is talking about Hezbollah. Syria, we're going to touch on in a minute, is now in the fray, isn't it? Do we think Syria is now drawn in? Absolutely it is. The bit that's sort of missing is this bit here in relation to Jordan. And I think Jordan is ultimately going to get involved in this conflict. Why do I think that? Because God says in Psalm 83 that Ammon, Moab and Edom, that are areas of Jordan, are also going to be part of Psalm 83. Now, you might say, well, that isn't really on the news at the minute, but it is if you look for it. On September the 9th, there was this headline, with Iran increasingly meddling in Jordanian politics, the kingdom's relations with Israel could fray. With Jordanians voting for a new parliament on Tuesday, this is only a few months ago really, the Hashemite kingdom's delicate ties with America and Israel are expected to become even more fraught. Iran is exploiting the dissatisfaction, aiming to undermine the monarchy and weaken its ties with America and Israel. And growing street sentiments that have been boiling hot since Hamas launched the October the 7th war. Now, this guy that we're going to have a look at in just a second is a chap called David Hurst, who's co-founder and editor-in-chief of something called the Middle East Eye. He was the Guardian newspaper's main correspondent on foreign affairs. This guy is not somebody that's a conspiracy theorist. He sort of knows what he's talking about. Listen to what he has to say.
Everyone is looking south to Egypt or north to Lebanon for a response to Israel's mission to force as many Palestinians as it can out of Gaza. They're looking in the wrong direction. They should be looking eastwards to Jordan for the real reaction. The kingdom has been shaken to the core from top to bottom by what's happening in Gaza. Queen Dania, the king's Palestinian wife, has appeared twice on CNN to denounce glaring Western double standards and failing to condemn the civilian deaths under Israeli bombardment. The Prime Minister, Bashar al-Assad, has said that the displacement of Palestinians is a fundamental violation of the treaty that Jordan signed with Israel all those years ago. And the Foreign Minister, Ayman Safadi, has said that another Nakba would amount to a declaration of war. But this is nothing compared to the reaction on the streets when Abu Ubaidah, the spokesman for the Qassam brigades, appealed to Jordanians to rise. The response was swift in coming. Tribal leaders in Al-Mazar sent their fraternal greetings to Hamas. The streets have been thronged with demonstrations, and the army has had to be sent to the border to prevent a march by Palestinians and East Bank Jordanians towards the Israeli border. The Prime Minister is right. Another Nakba would be a violation of the treaty that King Hussein signed with the Israeli Premier Yitzhak Rabin 30 years ago. So Jordan is serious when its parliament reviews the treaty as it's doing right now. And Jordan
Don't forget, of course, as well, that Jordan itself are the custodians of Temple Mount. Right? So they are super involved in Jerusalem. They will, I believe, get involved. Now, you might wonder where this picture comes from, but this is from Psalm 83. Because after that list of those conglomerate of nations, that confederacy of nations that come against Israel, you might say, well, what happens to them? It says that they're all going to come against Israel. They're going to want to destroy Israel. But does Psalm 83 say that they are going to destroy Israel? And it doesn't say that. It says in Psalm 83, do unto them, do unto this inner ring of peoples that want to destroy Israel, do unto them as unto Sisera. You go and you look about Sisera. You probably remember Sisera from Sunday school. And you read about this nice lady here called Jael, who gets a tent peg and smashes it through the head of Sisera, who was himself a military general, and hammers it straight through to the floor. And that is why I put there's Sinwar, who was the mastermind behind October the 7th and planned it for a long time. Ended up with me thinking this is exactly the same thing. In fact, Israel said he died of a traumatic brain injury. I think Sisera died of a traumatic brain injury. You probably don't get more traumatic than a tent peg smashed through your skull, through your temples, into the ground. And lo and behold, Sinwar, the same sort of thing happened. He had this traumatic brain injury. They shot him, but he died of a traumatic brain injury. We've seen the Hamas leader killed, as we've already said, as he's lying in his bed. Guess what? Where was Sisera? He was asleep in his bed. Fast asleep, went to bed, nothing wrong, everything's fine. And during the night, Jael smashes a tent peg through his head. This man, fast asleep, in the middle of the most secure compound in Iran, blown up. Psalm 83, I truly believe, is playing out before our very eyes. It's not just these two people that Israel has eliminated. They've eliminated the entire command structure of both Hamas and Hezbollah. And I don't know if you've noticed, but they keep replacing the Hezbollah leader. And then the next day it says, oh, he's been eliminated. Another one comes in. Oh, next day he's been eliminated. The next one comes in. Oh, he's been eliminated. It's really quite amazing what we're seeing happening. We've talked about this before as well, because here are literal peoples that surround Israel that want to destroy Israel. And it says, even Assyria has joined them. And just as these are literal places, I believe this is also a literal place. Assyria is a separate entity. You notice it's got them all listed out. And by the way, all these are tribes: Ishmaelites, Moab, Hagarites, Ammon, Amalek, Philistia, people of Tyre. You notice it doesn't say Lebanon, it says the people of Tyre. Right? So they're all people, and God says, and there's somebody backing them. In fact, modern versions say that, well, it says here, look, even Assyria joined them to reinforce Lot's descendants. There's this big power called Assyria that is backing this lot. Now, I wonder who that is. Who is this Assyrian power that's backing all of these smaller tribes that surround Israel? So you go and have a look, and you say, well, where was Assyria when all of Psalm 83 was being written? And there it is on the map. And then you put on the modern nations, and there's Iran, and there's Iraq, and there's Syria. And out of those three huge nations that covered the bulk of Assyria at that time, the most powerful one clearly in these last days is Iran. And you might say, well, why didn't the psalmist say Persia, or why didn't he just single out Iran? It's because it's this huge block of nations here, I think, but we now can see that it's Iran that's the major power that is behind all of this. Which sort of then makes sense when at the very same time that we see in Psalm 83 happening, what do we see in April? Remember this? Iran launches hundreds of drones and cruise missiles at Israel in an unprecedented attack. Iran has never, ever, ever attacked Israel. Not in its history. Iran launched more than 300 drones and missiles at Israel on Saturday night in the Islamic Republic's first ever direct attack on the Jewish state. Have a look at this.
Tel Aviv tonight, Israel says over 100 missiles have already been fired from Iran. Haifa this evening, Israel's Iron Dome missile defense attempting to intercept a first salvo of incoming Iranian missiles. The missiles being launched in Iran, responding to what Israel calls its new phase of the war.
Can you imagine
overnight
being Israel
it began
and seeing
Israel's
all these missiles coming over Jerusalem, over Tel Aviv? Almost all of them shot down. Very, very, very few got through. And then we get to October, and it happens again. Iran launches more than 180 ballistic missiles at Israel. They launch them towards the country in the large-scale attack that has further heightened fears of an all-out regional war. I don't know if you've seen on the news today, but there's a lot of noise right now about the fact that in the dying days of Biden's presidency, because Trump comes into power, I think it's on the 20th of January. So this is the weakest point of America right now. Biden's power is, ebbing away at a rate of knots. And they also know when Trump comes in, he's almost certainly 10 times more 100 times more anti-Iran than ever Biden was. So there's a lot of talk that in the next few days or so, Iran might well launch another major attack upon Israel. We wait to see what happens. But notice this, Iran is firing missiles. It's not sending in tanks at the minute. It's not sending in men. It's using its proxy armies, as Psalm 83 says, and it's firing itself missiles. In Isaiah 22, which isn't taken out of context, it's part of a series of burdens that are all happening at the time of the end. In Isaiah 22, it says, the Lord Almighty has a day of tumult and trampling and terror in the valley of vision, a day of battering down walls and crying out to the mountains. Elam takes up the quiver. Elam is southwest Iran. It runs along the Persian Gulf. It's actually where they've fired a lot of the missiles from, and it's where they've got some nuclear reactors right now. And you think, we're being told in these last days, that Iran is going to take up the quiver. And the quiver is exactly what they've taken up, because it's from the quiver you take your arrow, and it's from that you fire it. They're not firing bows and arrows, are they? They're firing the equivalent of a bow and arrow right now, which is, of course, the missiles that we've seen go across. In Isaiah 13, God says, I will stir up the Medes. The Medes is code for Iran. I'll stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver. And as for gold, they don't care about it. Their bows will also dash the young men to pieces. They'll have no pity on the fruit of the womb, and their eye will not spare children. There's other references to Iran and missiles as well, and it's no coincidence. God says they're obsessed with missiles. They're obsessed with arrows. They're obsessed with bows. They're obsessed with this thing, and they don't care about the money. This is ideological for Iran. You can't buy your way out of this. This is an ideological war. That's what we're being told. Now, this is also quite amazing because on October the 3rd, there was this headline that somebody from Australia sent me on email. And he said, it was a brother from Australia, and he said, in the light of what you've said for a long, long time about there being an inner ring war, I had to send you this. And the headline was, Iran tried to light a ring of fire, but now Israel wields the blowtorch. The Iranian Ayatollah's strategy from the outset was to light a ring of fire around Israel to burn it to death. The ring has many parts to it and has all flared up. Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Iraq, just to name the biggest, all are armed, financed and directed by Iran. This is like reading Psalm 83, and yet it's in a newspaper. Israel has inflicted so much damage on Iran's proxies and has doused so much of the fire that Iran finally felt compelled to engage the enemy itself. So see all this here. You've got all this talk about a ring of fire, and now Israel wields a blowtorch. In other words, it's turned the fire back on its enemies. You then go to Zechariah 12, which again we've quoted for about a decade. Every year I've come here and said Zechariah 12 is the inner ring war. And this is the slide that I've put up every single year for pretty much the last decade. And I've said, look, God says that he's going to make Jerusalem like an intoxicating drink that makes the nearby people stagger when they send their armies to Jerusalem and Judah. This is nothing to do with Russia and the outer circle of nations that comes, that's Ezekiel 38. These are nearby people sending their armies to Jerusalem and Judah. But look what it says in verse 6. On that day, I will make the clans of Judah like a flame that sets a wood pile ablaze and like a burning torch. How amazing is that? What did it say on the previous slide? Iran tried to light a ring of fire, but now Israel wields the blowtorch. What do we read? We read that they become a burning torch among the sheaves of grain. Israel says God is going to become like a burning torch. They will burn up the neighboring people right and left while the people living in Jerusalem remain secure. Do you realize not one single solitary person has been killed by a single one of those hundreds and hundreds of ballistic missiles that Iran has fired? Not one. Not a single solitary one. Those living in Jerusalem have remained secure. But what's happened to Israel's nearby enemies? Are they all dwelling secure, or are they being burned up right and left? So I honestly believe Zechariah 12 is happening before our very eyes. And if that is true, brothers and sisters, it means this, that the final launch sequence, if you like, the final countdown to Christ's return has started. It must have started, because this now all leads through to Jesus coming back. In the same chapter, Jesus comes back. In just a few, I think it's verse 9, it says that they will look upon him whom they pierced and mourn. So if we're in verse 6, there's not many more verses to get to 9, is there? And Jesus is here. Nearby people attack and Jerusalem remains secure. Let me show you this, because back in, I think it was December, I gave a talk on Zoom to quite a number of people down in Cornwall. No, wait a minute, when would it have been? It was before Syria was on the news, so it was probably about the summertime, somewhere about then last year. And somebody said during the discussion, Andy, how is Syria going to get involved in this? Because you're telling us that Syria will get involved in this. And I said, it will. I don't quite know how it's all going to happen. Already Israel is attacking Syria, but something's going to happen to drag Israel into the Syrian war. And lo and behold, 3 months later, Syria isn't just headline news in Israel, it's headline news around the world. Have a look at this.
Breaking news overseas out of Syria. President Bashar al-Assad has resigned, left the country. That is according to Russia. Rebel forces from the group HTS say they now control the capital of Damascus. The country's prime minister released a video saying the government is ready to extend a hand to the opposition. ABC's James Longman has the latest on the situation unfolding there.
History made overnight as Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad is overthrown in a lightning move by rebel fighters. They are this morning inside the presidential palace, walking its huge halls, celebrating amid the abandoned luxury of the Assad regime.
The Assad dynasty has been in power for pretty much as long as I've been alive. I was born in 1969. And Assad's father came to power in 1971, and it was only a couple of weeks ago. They've ruled all that time, my whole life. Assad's family have ruled with rods of iron, killing hundreds of thousands of their own people to stay in power. And overnight, Assad is gone, rushed off to Russia. The Ayatollah Khomeini loses everything, and it talks there, we won't read all of that out, but basically the Ayatollahs backed Assad, along with Russia, by the way, of course we know that. And so now, not only has he lost Hamas, not only has he lost Hezbollah, he is now losing his greatest major national power, which is Syria, and suddenly all of that investment, I mean billions upon billions invested by Iran into the Assad regime, has all gone up in smoke. Do you think the rebels are going to pay Iran back all the $50 billion that's owed back to Iran? And they're not. They've just lost $50 billion overnight. It's a shocking result for Iran. And what then happened was, exactly at this same time, Israel carries out dozens of airstrikes. Have a look at this.
Tonight, with Syria convulsed in revolutionary chaos, its neighbor Israel taking decisive action. Israeli warplanes carrying out strikes across the country, leaving this airbase near Damascus in flames, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. The target, Israel says, military sites, including the Assad regime's stockpiles of chemical and biological weapons, which it fears could fall into the hands of extremists.
The only interest we have is the security of Israel and its citizens.
Bashar al-Assad, Syria's toppled dictator, used chemical weapons against his own people during 13 bloody years of civil war.
If you want to know more about Damascus, I've done a video on Damascus, put it up on YouTube on the 30th of December. Have a look at it, because it's just all about Damascus. It's amazing what God says about Damascus. If you've never looked at Genesis 14 in relation to events now happening, there's an incredible allegory going on right now. Go and have a look at it if you want to. I don't know if you've ever looked at Amos 1 recently, but here's another interesting prophecy. Amos chapter 1 says that the Lord will roar from Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem. And then there's 4 places that are mentioned in relation to God judging. And it says, thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Damascus. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Gaza. Verse 9, thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Tyre. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Ammon, I'm going to bring judgment on all these places. How amazing is that? There is Damascus. There's Gaza, Hamas. There's Tyre, Hezbollah. The only missing link right now is Ammon. Where's Ammon? Jordan. Do you think Jordan is going to be in amongst our news at some point? Or do you think that was a throwaway line from God that actually isn't going to happen? It's going to happen. The other one, of course, in relation to Syria, again, we've looked at this a lot over the years, is Isaiah 17, the burden of Damascus. Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city and will be a ruinous heap. The very fact that Damascus even exists right now is proof that this has not been fulfilled, because it is going to be taken away from being a city. It will cease to exist. If you look up in the Guinness Book of Records, it tells you that Damascus is the oldest capital city in the world. That's what you go and look it up. The oldest capital city in the world, which is quite interesting because it's only 136 miles away from Jerusalem, which is going to be the future capital city of the world. And in the talk that I did on Damascus, you'll see how there's a link between Damascus and Jerusalem right through the Bible. It's no coincidence that the Apostle Paul was close to Damascus when Jesus was last ever seen. The last time that Jesus was ever seen wasn't when he took off from the mountain, the Mount of Olives, because he appeared as a bright light in heaven. And he told Saul, as he was very close to Damascus, to go and start preaching to the Gentiles. And the preaching to the Gentiles began as he saw Christ as a bright light in heaven. Jesus is coming back as a bright light in heaven, and at that point the preaching to the Gentiles will come to an end. But this is all another story. You need to go and watch the other video. Look, the bottom line is, there is Assad, but he's gone. And the West is saying, oh, well, this could be it, the time of wonderful peace for Syria. This could be a wonderful time of peace, because surely now there'll be democracy, and all these raging, fighting, all this maelstrom of nightmare, terrorist Islamic groups are all going to make friends and suddenly all shake hands and it will be a lovely, lovely country. That is not going to happen. I know it's not going to happen because Damascus has got to completely be destroyed as a city. It also tells us in the same chapter that the 45 towns of northern Israel, the AV doesn't say that, it says Ephraim, but Ephraim is code for northern Israel. The 45 towns of northern Israel will also be destroyed. In the conflagration between Israel and Syria, which is only just beginning, it will end up with northern Israel taking some major punches from Syria, but Israel will win. The chapter makes clear. So it basically says two things are going to cease. The fortress from northern Israel, and in the verse that we've just read, it talks about the kingdom departing from Syria. And so Israel has got a fortress in northern Israel. It's got all of its defences and iron domes, but something's going to happen that is going to weaken Israel in the north. Jerusalem will continue to remain secure, but there's trouble, more trouble coming on Israel, I believe, as yet to come. The end of Isaiah chapter 17 then says these amazing words. So after Damascus has gone, after Israel is recovering from the war with Syria, it then says this: listen, the armies of many nations roar like the roaring of the sea. Hear the thunder of the mighty forces as they rush forward like the thundering waves. Well, well, well. I wonder what this is talking about. Who are all these many nations that now rush into the void that's left when Damascus has been destroyed and Israel is living in some temporary peace? I wonder who that is. Any guesses? This is the outer circle of nations. This is Ezekiel 38. All the outer circle nations rushing in. Do you think this man is happy about the state of play in Syria? What do you think Putin said? Oh, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Assad, we backed him for a decade or more. We've invested billions of rubles. We've built a port. We've got troops. We've got army. All of it's having to scatter and make a run for it. Doesn't matter. Or do you think he thinks it does matter? Russia condemns Israeli strikes on Syria. Putin and Assad meet as Middle East tensions continue to rise. Russia slams Israel in attempts to gain power and influence in the Middle East. Russia is likely trying to exploit the conflict in the Middle East to expand its influence, war experts say. Russia tells Israel not to even consider attacking Iranian nuclear facilities. Putin denies Russian defeat in Syria and says Israel is the main winner. He said Israel was the main beneficiary of the current situation, and Russia condemns the seizure of any Syrian territories. This is obvious, Putin said, only about 2 weeks ago. Because what Israel has done, and you've seen this on the news, not only has it gone and bombed Damascus with 400 strikes or more, it's actually gone in and captured Mount Hermon. And again, Mount Hermon is massively significant from a Bible perspective. Go and look at Mount Hermon and see what you find out. It's amazing. Israel's now captured Mount Hermon, and Mount Hermon is in Syria. And so it's created a huge buffer zone into Syria. And the rebels have said, Israel, no, we want to be friends with you actually, but please get out. And Israel's saying, we're not getting out. We're creating a huge buffer zone inside Syria. Putin says Israel's the winner, and it doesn't like it. You can hear the language from Putin as he's talking. Russia is making a fragile pivot from Syria to Libya. And this is another point that's happened, isn't it? So they've got a port in Syria, Russia has, in Tartus, and they built that port, and now all the ships have gone, all the Russian ships have disappeared, and what they're now doing is heading to Libya. Does that ring any bells, Libya? Well, hopefully it does, because in Ezekiel 38, Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and there's a whole list of nations. Look, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya come with Gog. Libya's even mentioned, and that's where they're going to right now to build this other port. You notice on this list that Persia's on the list, and it's first on the list. So Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, is talking about Gog is the Russian leader, and Meshech and Tubal is a reference to Russia. And there's a list here now of the nations that join Russia when it comes in this outer circle war. And first on the list is Persia, Iran. And what we've seen is exactly that happen. Russia sends Iran air defense systems as fears of regional war loom. So Russia is out there protecting Iran, who is going to join forces with it in the future. In fact, on this slide here, look, I didn't mention it, but down the bottom it says, Russian leader, be thou a guard unto the nations that come down with you. And that word guard means to protect. So Russian leader, you're going to protect Iran. That's what you're going to do. You're going to act as a guard and protect them. And therefore, when I see a headline like this saying Russia's going to send air defense systems into Iran to protect them, that is Ezekiel 38. Iran sends more than 200 ballistic missiles to Russia to help them with the war in Ukraine. Russia is close to signing a new bilateral treaty with Iran. Putin says growing ties with very close ally Iran is a top priority. That was in the Daily Telegraph in October. Russia tells Israel not to even consider attacking Iran. We've already looked at that. And the last bit I was just going to show you is this, because this again happened this year. In Daniel 11 verse 40, it talks about the king of the south pushing at him. And the him there is Gog himself. In fact, in a modern version, it says at the time of the end, the king of the south will attack the king of the north. There's going to be a military provocation before Russia comes down and invades Israel. Daniel 11 verse 40 says there's a push that happens. There's a military provocation that happens. So on top of everything else that's going on, there's a military provocation from the king of the south. And I believe we've even seen that happen in 2024, because look at this, on August the 16th, Ukrainian forces push into Russia with US-provided arms. The US is the king of the south, Russia is Gog, and Magog, Meshach, and Tubal, and they're pushing in. And the word push is the Hebrew word to gore, as with an animal with a horn. So on the weekly World Watch slide, I put, there is the bull with its horn, and Russia sees this as a military provocation from America, not from Ukraine. So even though Ukraine is firing missiles in, it's America that's allowing this to happen. And so we have this push that is underway. Ukraine is provoking and poking Russia to use nuclear weapons, the Russian MP says. So we finished the year in a very, very, very fragile state. So I'm just going to skip along here and play you one last video, because what now has been happening with all this going on is that Putin is changing his nuclear doctrine to allow the use of nuclear weapons, even if conventional weapons are used against him. So have a look at this.
On the same day, Moscow said Ukraine struck deep into Russia with U.S.-made ATACMS missiles. President Vladimir Putin lowered Russia's threshold for a nuclear response to be able to respond to a broader range of conventional attacks. Russia has the world's biggest nuclear arsenal, and Putin is the main decision maker on how to use it.
So look, we're on the, surely, out of all the years I've ever come here, there's never been anything like we've witnessed, I don't think, ever on this scale. Israel's fighting a war on 7 fronts, 458 days and counting. All of this is counting down to the return of Jesus. And to add all into the mix, into this maelstrom of conflagration, is this man. And do you think this is going to help matters, or is it going to make things a whole bunch worse? God has put him in power at the very end of time, because certainly something is going to happen to destabilize things even more. It probably isn't going to bring stability to the world, is he, President Trump? He's not going to bring stability. We know there's a temporary time of peace, so he might well force peace in Ukraine, but only after maybe more destruction. There's got to be a time of peace in Ukraine coming up, or at least a temporary standoff or stalemate, because here's the thing. Russia has got to come down to Israel. Russia cannot come down to Israel while it's fighting a war in Ukraine. It hasn't got the ability to do so. That's why Assad fell, because it didn't have the strength to support Assad in power while it's got all of its forces hammering Ukraine. So Russia can't come south while the war in Ukraine continues. Therefore, what Trump has said is, I am going to, on my first day in office, bring the Ukraine war to an end. That's highly unlikely to happen. But that is and has to happen at some point, some negotiated stalemate or standoff between Russia and Ukraine that frees up Russian forces. The other thing that's going to happen at some point is, after this conflagration around Israel has probably widened a bit more and Syria's got involved in Jordan, there will come a point when Israel dwells in some temporary peace, and into that void comes Russia and Iran and North African nations and so on. How long does all that take? I don't know. But I don't think it's, all these things are going at a rate of knots now. Who would have thought Assad would have disappeared almost overnight and everything changed in the Middle East? And Jesus could come back in the clouds of heaven at any point, I think, from here on in. I really think it can be at any point. And probably it would be hard to say, that this has taken us all by surprise. I had no idea that Jesus was so close in coming. If he appeared in the clouds of heaven tomorrow, it shouldn't really be a shock, should it? Because of the multitude of incredible signs that God has given us. And he didn't have to tell us all this stuff. He didn't have to tell us any of this. He could have just said, one day Jesus is going to come back. And, just keep reading the Bible and, working together. He didn't. He said, I'll tell you all these things are going to happen at the very end of time. And brothers and sisters, they are happening. Thanks for listening.